Welcome, everybody, and delighted that you could join us here today at American Jewish University. We have double privilege of being able to have a conversation with Rose Waldman, who is an extraordinary Yiddishist and has just translated what may well go down in history as the last Yiddish novel, this by the wonderful author Chaim Grade, who I hope we'll talk about too, who has come out with his last book, which is Sons and Daughters, which you are free to order and you should. I was delighted to have the chance to read it and delighted to enter into conversation. So Rose, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start, if you don't mind. Tell me the story of this book, not the plot, but how did this come to be and how did it find the light of day now?
Okay, so back about 8 years ago, I was contacted by Alti Carper, who's an editor at Knopf, and she told me that that Ivo, I already knew that Ivo was one of the co-owners of the Grade estate, and I had actually already asked them, like, if they find anything to have me in mind, not knowing if they would. So she contacted me that yes, Jonathan Brent wants me to. They found a novel. And it's pretty long. She thinks it'll be about 250 pages when complete. And if I'd want to translate it. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity and I said yes. And I started translating it. And then the way I do it, I know other translators do it differently, where they like to read everything and then go back once they understand the story. I do it differently. I actually read as I translate. I find it keeps me motivated and excited and curious. And so there's like something to look forward to as I work. And when I was getting pretty close to the end, I realized that something was not adding up. I was nearly done. I had maybe a chapter left. And there were so many loose strings. So I know I didn't expect Grade to tie everything up in this tidy bow, but I did expect some things to get resolved somewhat. And here it just felt like it was impossible that all of those loose ends could be resolved or at least come to some sort of satisfying ending in that one chapter. So at that point, luckily, I write about that in my translator's note. Somebody from who was studying in Israel, Yehuda Zirkin, made me aware that there were different letters that Chaim Grade had written, and he actually scanned them for me. They were in the National Library of Israel, and he sent them to me. And then when he did, I started reading those letters, which are totally fascinating in their own right. I saw that Grade was saying that finally I'm just letting myself be convinced against my will, and I'm going to publish volume 1 on its own. And it's already at the editor or at the printer, something like that. And then I'm going to work on volume 2 and then do that separately. So that's kind of when I realized we have to find a volume 2. And then the search began, and became almost like, like an Indiana Jones plot where now everybody's searching for volume 2. Do you want me to continue, or do you have like another question?
This is fascinating. I love the history story, so please keep us going.
Yeah. So anyway, so then the person who was kind of cataloging everything there, her name is Beata, and I called her. I had known her because we had been fellows together at the Yiddish Book Center Translation Fellowship, and I said, "What did you find so far? Is there anything that's volume 2?" And she told me there's definitely no book, but there are a whole bunch of newspaper clippings. Come in and take a look. So I did. I went in and she brought out the whole box and she showed me the different folders. And sure enough, I saw that the story continued. So, we kept uncovering another part.
Wait, Rose, I'm going to jump in here. I want to make sure that the people who are listening, what do you mean newspaper clippings? Is this a book that came out in a newspaper?
Yes. So to begin with, the story was a serial, and it went through different newspapers. Actually, it started, I think, in the Tugmarken Journal, and then it went over to the Farvards, and then it was like it went in 3 different shifts. So Grada wrote this book over the course of probably 15 to 20, no, something like 20 years for sure. I think he started in 65 and he wrote until his death. He was still working on the novel. So yes, it came out like every week people would read it, and it started with one name, this Alta Hose, and then it was Zinentechted, and then it was Beis Harav, which is my accent is Hasidish, so I guess to your listeners it would be Beis Harav, and it changed titles and it changed places, and some of the stuff got repeated. So the first volume was tight because it had already been in contract with Knopf. It was already on galley sheets, ready to be printed. The
Wow.
second volume, what we just had to piece together from the newspaper clippings. So granted, it wasn't like a major piecing together. They went in order. Every single week there was another installment, and I just followed that. But it wasn't, there were some mistakes here and there. There were some repetitions. Names got changed, like somebody had a name in the first half and then maybe Grada forgot and he got a different first name later. So, things like that. And then finally, we had as much as we could. And then I would say it comes pretty close to an end. It probably needed that one clinching chapter, but at least the narrative arcs came to some sort of completion.
Yes.
But we knew that something was still missing.
That's great. And we will get to the plot of the story in a moment, but I want to ask you a literary question. For those of you listening in, I assume some of you are familiar with Grada's other wonderful work. He did a series of novellas and extended short stories. His major prior novel is a huge 2-volume work called The Yeshiva, which is a wonderful study of human psychology and how religion can be an extension of one's psychological impulses and character. I was struck in reading this one that because it was serialized in a paper, each chapter was pretty much of a constant length, and it starts and stops, starts and stops. So you kind of have to rev up after you finish a chapter to start a new one. How did that work for you as a translator? How did that work for you as a reader?
Okay, so as a translator, the part that was difficult was because it's a slow process, right? I have to, I would do a junk draft, do maybe 2 chapters of that junk draft, go back, start perfecting it a little so that at least I fill in all the words and all of that, then do another 2 chapters and go back. And at least in the beginning, it felt to me like, the chapters were disconnected. And like when you said you had to rev up, me too. I had to kind of remember, wait, who is this one? Who is that one? But once I had enough of it and I went back to do the 3rd or 4th draft, by then it already felt like a novel, like this big sprawling saga, but I got it. And then and with each reading, in a sense, it became a little bit more pleasurable because the humorous parts or the parts, just like what you said, like he's very good at this, like the psychological evaluation of a human being, like what makes the person tick. All of those pleasures came later when I was just reading it and, the draft was already getting to a place where I could not have to go back and correct every single word.
Yes. So I was fascinated by the book. I continue to think that Grada is the greatest Yiddish writer of all time, possibly with an exception of Sholem Aleichem. But certainly in terms of serious novels, he's by far my favorite. Share with us the broad outlines of the story. What happens and what's this really about?
Okay, so there's this one family where the parents are very traditional. The father's a rabbi. His parents or her parents, not his parents, but her parents at least, she has this very nice rabbinical pedigree. and they have a very happy marriage, and they feel like they have this most beautiful family. And as the family gets older, the typical challenges of the times, and I think that's universal, they're the same challenges, I think, that people who choose a traditional lifestyle or who have a religious lifestyle still have today, where the kids start exploring their own path, and this, very wholesome family is suddenly falling apart. Other, than that one daughter who they've managed to kind of marry off to also a Rosh Yeshiva, so also, in the rabbinical field, all of them kind of went their separate ways. So one ran off to Switzerland, one decided he wants to become a business person and he was repulsed by his rabbinical pedigree. One decided that she doesn't want to waste her entire life on doing nothing, so she goes to a school for nursing. She wants to become a nurse. And then slowly but surely, like they're each kind of doing their own thing, and very much, like Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, the parents are like, what happened? How did this happen to us? And then, of course, there are all kinds of other things. This is just like the core family, but there are other families, and like there's an uncle, and Grada gives us these really funny, insights into what makes him tick. Like he's all into money, and he's pretending to just be into learning and Torah, and then his kids kind of also. Each family, I guess, has their own stuff. Then there's the grandfather, where there's this funny line, like, the world's changed. Well, he doesn't actually say the world's changing. He's saying, like, nations have fought, they've had wars, they've reconciled, they've had wars again. Different countries have had different owners. But like this guy, his name is Eliezer Epstein. He is still waging his exact same battles that he waged 50 years ago and all of that. So he's also a very interesting character. And that's basically, I guess you'd have to read the book to get more of it, but this is the gist of it.
Wonderful. The dynamic of families that see themselves as unraveling is universal. Kids have a way of growing up to be their own people despite our best intentions as parents, and we did it to our parents before us. And overlaid on that, and yet profoundly part of it, is the struggle of Jews entering modernity, which is, as it's portrayed in this book, not a simple thing and not clearly a blessing either. There's a way in which Grada, although he himself was part of the modern secular move in his own life, taking on the role of a Yiddish author, really loves the life of the tradition and the life of his parents and his extended family, who were murdered by the Nazis. So he's writing an extended eulogy for a world that doesn't exist anymore, but it's not separable from the psychological stuff going on. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, because you've really lived with these people very intimately for quite a time. It could have been a generation choosing various paths within the secular world, but they remain close to their parents emotionally. But Grada overlays it with real alienation and terrible hurt. So talk to me about what's going on with that, and what do you think Grada is trying to help us get to?
Okay, so I think that the story, not that it mirrors his life necessarily, but it mirrors his feelings in real life. I mean, possibly most authors do that, where they, their own feelings, they put that into their books. But with him, it was very much so. And for that, I'm really grateful. Besides discovering that this book has a volume 2, besides that, I am really grateful that I got to read his letters. Because he himself, and this is at the end of his life, he's already writing some of these letters in the 70s and even into the early 80s, which means pretty much right before he died, because he died in 1982. And he himself kept struggling with this thing. He was a fully modern person living in a modern world, taking part of being part of secular circles and all of that. And still, he writes this pretty much outright, like, I cannot get away from the yeshiva. He never quite got fully away from it, not in his mind, not in his heart. And you see this in a lot of his letters. And then you also see this in the book. So Grada is, I would say, probably like one of the most important things that he's contributed, not only to literature, but also to history, is that he writes about a world that disintegrated and was murdered and annihilated, but he writes about how they lived. So it's very that world, the world in Lithuania and in Poland and in Warsaw, where he has some people here, all of that is very alive, and the pettinesses of some of their arguments and the things they care about, and their greediness, the way the children, the grandfather remarries and the children come saying, hey, we don't want the second wife getting all this money. All of these universal tropes are within that life, that world, the world that isn't anymore, but whose themes we still have. So I think just the way he struggled with that, missing that, but not wanting necessarily to go back, that comes through very, very much in the book. It's not like Grado ever probably wanted to become a yeshiva boy again or go back to it. He could have. He had the choice. I mean, maybe not anymore once he was married, but, it's not that he really wants it, but he still kind of misses the innocence of it, the beauty of it. I read once a poem that he wrote about Lithuania, and he literally, he anthropomorphizes. Oh, I might have put in an extra syllable there. The houses, the cobblestones, everything. It's so alive to him, the beauty of it. So I think he could never quite get away from that, and then that's very much obvious in his books.
So let me ask. That's wonderful and very insightful. I think in his position, the temptation would be to either talk about their human foibles as a way of saying we're not missing anything, or to turn them into paper saints, and to say, these people were all noble and beautiful. But what he's really does, while loving them every step of the way, he humanizes them. And you see real flaws and real pettiness, even among the rabbis who he has a certain veneration for. He really does show their bad reactions, their misreactions, their falling into the same emotional traps. And I've always imagined, I didn't have the ability to ever know him. I started rabbinical school the year before he died. There's a greatness in his character to be able to love flawed people and to be able to say, I'm choosing not to be part of that world, and yet there's a part of me that will never leave it. Talk to me about that. There's a gedula, there's a greatness to that.
Yeah, I think that's very, very perceptive. And I felt the same, that he's the one writer who pulled this off. He didn't turn the community he left, he defected from, in a sense. He didn't turn them into the other. He still, in his heart, is part of them, and they are as human to him and as he himself is. And also, like you said, he didn't romanticize them. Even after the Holocaust, when a lot of writers did that, there was the temptation to say, they were all saints and look what happened to them. He didn't do that, but he also, even as he explores their human foibles, they are just human foibles. It's not because they're religious that they're bad or anything like that. And that's pretty amazing. So I will say that there are some writers who maybe they didn't pull it off, but I would say that you can see, let's say Peretz, you can see that in the beginning when he left religion, so to speak, his works are a little mocking of religious Jews. And then 20 years later, if you look at those books, suddenly he romanticizes them, because by then he is so removed from them that he can kind of afford to romanticize them. But Grada does none of that. They're human.
Well, and I guess I want to pull that one step further. I mean, Peretz is a great example of that. Also, magnificent stories for those of you who haven't read any Yud Lamed Peretz. He's available in English translation as well, and wonderful, wonderful stories. But there's a way in which, when he was fleeing from it, he hated it. And
Right.
there's a lot of people who didn't start writing nice things about the shtetl until they were in Manhattan, and they were safely away from it. And then they could just remember this idealized patina-covered version that's not real. And there's a way in which I'm going to use an odd word for Grada. He feels woke in the sense that
True.
he's so comfortable being a Jew that Jews don't have to be perfect. Like, it's
Right.
okay that these people were meaningful and significant and flawed, and they get to be
Right.
just as flawed as everybody else, and that's okay. Like, I love his comfort in his own skin.
Exactly. Right. Right. And it's unusual.
It's
And I
very
think,
unusual in
right.
any culture to be able to not internalize that dichotomy and stay true is his part of his greatness.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Hi,
um,
Artson, just so you know, there's some feedback coming from your end. Do you have any other applications open besides this one?
I will close I mean, nothing open at the moment, but I will shut the programs that are open in case that makes a difference.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. Let's, if we could, try turning to you for a minute.
Okay.
Tell us how you became a Yiddishist.
Okay, so I'm not sure I would call myself a Yiddishist, but yes, a translator of Yiddish. So, firstly, Yiddish is my first language. I was born into a Hasidic family. I still am Hasidic. I belong to the Satmar community, and so Yiddish, like I said, that's a native language. And then when I did go to college, and then I went to grad school for writing. Um, and when I did, when I decided on the course, the chair told me, she asked me if I speak another language, and she told me that I can do kind of a 2-for-1, a dual degree in fiction and in translation.
Hmm.
So why not? I said I'll try it. And then from my first semester, my first class, I fell in love with translation. So I didn't even actually know a lot of Yiddish literature. This was not the type of literature that I grew up with. It was not familiar to me. So I went kind of the opposite route of probably Yiddishists who want to read the stories, they're interested, and then once they maybe read a translation, they want to learn the language so that they can read it in its original.
Yeah.
And so the literature kind of teaches them the language. With me, I had the language, but I didn't necessarily have the literature. Um, and that was it. And I was sold, and I just got into it from there. So it was kind of on a lark, but and then this was just an art that I really enjoy doing.
That's great. And you can tell me you don't want to discuss it if you don't want to, but for me and for most of our listeners, we are not Hasidic. And so it's a world that has allure and also seems a bit different and distant sometimes. Um, Grada navigated the tension of writing fiction when it's not clear his parents would have approved of that. That was in some ways a stepping off the derech, stepping outside of
Right.
traditional observance. How is it for a Hasidic scholar to enter into a life dancing with fiction?
Um, okay, so let's separate like the writing fiction and then the translating. So writing fiction is not that unusual in the Hasidic world, meaning the audience is Hasidim, right? There are all kinds of magazines out there. Unlike the rest of the world, the kind of media, print media for that are catering to not only Hasidim, but to Hasidim too, is thriving. They're just new magazines all the time.
Yeah.
So, so there's a lot there, and people have talent and they're interested, and a lot of them are writing for these magazines. So I'm not going to say that fiction is the most of it. Fiction is like a tiny part, but there are plenty of Hasidic women and men who write. So there isn't, obviously not everyone has gone to college for it, but there is that. So that's not the strange part. The strange part, I guess, was getting into translating the kinds of books that are not really geared toward Hasidim, and actually not anything that I grew up with either. So I would say, look, I know the Hasidic world seems very restrictive to most people, right? Especially whatever you see out there in the media tends to only focus on the restrictive parts. But as long as you follow certain rules, if you still belong to the community and you dress appropriately for the community and you're okay with that, most people don't really care what you do. It seems a little exotic that I, translate these books, but no one really cares.
Sure.
It's not like, it's not the way it's, depicted in films and all of that. Like there's this whole community waiting to throw stones at you. It's not at all like that. So, okay, it's,
No, and I want to emphasize that there is a way in which the media caricatures anything that they don't know intimately, and again, that's one of the things I love about Chaim Grade is he won't do that stereotyping. He's willing to let people. He's willing to have secular people have flaws. He's willing to let observant people have flaws, and be ambivalent. So one of the rabbi's sons flees to Switzerland, and in a fairly unhappy marriage with a non-Jewish woman, and he has a son who's very not Jewish in appearance and presumably in behavior as well. And yet his ambivalence is what becomes the source of his torment. It's really like, it's not like he's slammed the door shut. He has strong incompatible feelings that Grade really lays out in a very artful way. So let me ask you another question about the book, if I could. In the background, and he never mentions it overtly, we know that we are in the interwar period, and we know that the Holocaust is coming. We know that the Nazis are going to take over. And there are Polish fascists who are starting to impoverish the Jewish community and beat them, but it never gets to the center stage. It's just this drumbeat in the background. How does that shape the book and the book's unfolding in your mind?
Yeah. So when I started, I mean, not started, but once I was in the middle of the book, I was sure, I was like so sure that the end is going to be the Holocaust, and like all of these people get shipped off on the trains and something like that. I figured for sure the story has to end there. And maybe that's kind of going to be, what's like all the worries and all the heartache and pain that they had about their family. What is that in light of what happens to them later? And then, of course, the closer I got to the ending, I realized, that is not Grada, and would never happen. Even if I can't know for sure, but I think even if he would have finished it to the last dot, I don't think the Holocaust will come into play. It would be just before, like maybe it would be 1932 or something like that, because it would be too trite, I think, and against what he kind of stood for, which is depicting the life pre-Holocaust. There have been so many books, so much literature on the Holocaust itself. That was not Grade's place. And this was going to be, I guess, like his magnum opus, or I think he viewed it that way. He actually writes that in his letters, and how he's going to get right to the edge, but not actually there. But yeah, it's definitely because we know what happened and we're reading it now and, in the 2000s. It's on the page without being on the page. We
Yeah.
feel like we know it's going to happen, and we know that all of these people are going to be wiped out. But
Yeah.
it would, I feel, cheapen the novel if he would have ended it with that. And it seems like he didn't. So there was one thing that I left out when I was telling you about the progress of the book, that we kind of made peace with the fact that there isn't that final chapter, that final ending. But once we finished it, I had the editing also took a long time, because in the end, it's instead of the 250 pages that I started with, it was like 700 pages. So the editing was done, and we had already gone through all the boxes and everything. And then Yivo had digitized all of it already. And that's when I'm going through them, and I don't even know why. I wanted to see it again, and I wanted to read some of the letters, see what Yivo had, because some is still only available in Israel. And I'm going through it, and then I see 2 pages that are just part of other pages. And I'm saying, wait, what's this? This is not in the book. And then I translated that in my translator's notes. So there are those 2 pages basically kind of say, maybe I shouldn't give it away if you read it. I don't know if people want spoilers, but you can kind of see that that's where Grada was probably planning to end the book.
Yes.
And so we do kind of get an ending of sorts. And it's not the Holocaust.
Right. So when I was raised very secular and fell in love with God and Torah and mitzvot in college. And the Hillel rabbi was a remarkable man, Ben Zion Gold, who was a survivor of the Shoah, came to America with no relatives whatsoever. Remarkable, courageous man. And he used to talk about how people focus on how the Jews were murdered, and they know nothing about how they lived. And that really what is to be celebrated and remembered is the incredibly vital and diverse civilization and the values that sustained the Jewish communities in Ashkenaz. And that, I think, is Chaim Grada's greatness, is he really, with this drumbeat of destruction in the background, he is nonetheless holding our focus on the lives of people.
Right. Right. There's another person. Are you familiar with a book? They called me Mayor July. That's the father of Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblet. Am I saying her name right? I'm not sure. She's the head of I don't know what her official title is, of the Poland Museum in Warsaw. And so her father, he lived in Apta, and he started painting when he was like, I don't know, maybe 80 years old, because he wanted to depict how the people in his town lived. And he said the same thing. He said there's so much about how they died, but there's so little about how they lived. And he just does these different paintings, and they put it in a book, which that's the title of the book. I'm sorry, do you hear my phone in the background? The landline or not?
No, go ahead.
Oh, good. Okay. So, and that's the title of the book. They called me Mayor July, and he has all these interesting pictures of how this holiday looked or that, and this is what the kids used to do. They would throw stones. And Chaim Grada kind of does the same in his prose, in a more, in a different, more sophisticated, I shouldn't call it sophisticated, just a different medium. In the writing, we're also, like we said, like you're saying, what your rabbi said, he wants to tell us how they lived, not just how they died.
Right. So let's pivot, and then we'll make time for whatever questions people might have put in the chat. The book is coming out in 2025. What is
The book actually came out this week.
Great.
The pub date was the 25th.
So everyone should rush out, and if you haven't yet bought a copy, buy a couple copies. You'll want to give gifts to. What do you think it teaches this generation? Like in our age now, what does that book hold for us?
Okay, so firstly, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So in everything. So sadly, with anti-Semitism, nothing has really changed despite everything. We are living in a culture where there is a lot of that. And then also even just in human insights and in the human psyche, I mean, pretty much, look, pain is pain and family's family and all these different themes that come up. They're all very relatable. So that's one thing. Um, I think just the fact of what we spoke about before, that neither puts down, like neither romanticizes the culture, nor is derogatory about it. I think that in itself has a lesson for us because we humans are different and I mean, we're the same, but we're also different. And we all come from different backgrounds, different cultures, and we adopt different lifestyles. You're saying you adopted a different lifestyle from how you grew up, and most people do. And if we could just be a little bit more able to see each other, not just in black and white, good or bad, but from that lens, that the way Grada saw his people as we're all humans, we're all wonderful, and we're all terrible. We're all flawed in certain ways. And to just be a little bit more accepting of each other, I think that would be a beautiful lesson that we can kind of take from the book and then from his style.
Lovely. Rose, several people have asked, is there a Yiddish version of the book that will be available or that is available?
So there have been talks, but I don't think anything at this point has been decided. Yivo has digitized everything. It's not difficult, but it's also not that easy. You have to give yourself a little time to kind of go through all the archives and figure out what's what. So you could read everything online, but it's not like there's a book version yet as a whole. You'd have to read it the way I did it, with like individual installments, newspaper installments, at least for the second half.
Great. Thank you for answering that. There are several people who wanted to know about that, who are able to read Yiddish and are here because they already have a knowledge and a passion about it. Someone put in congratulations on the beautiful New Yorker article.
Thank
So,
you.
um,
Yeah, it's gotten a lot of love, this book. I have to say, I mean, I'm giving credit to Grada, but I'm happy to take whatever credit they want to give me. But yes, it's really been reviewed well and by quite a lot of publications. So yeah.
um, so, one short answer, someone is asking about my tie. Yes, the tie is ancient and modern Hebrew with Sumerian cuneiform in a DNA helix. I'm always the only one in the room who has such a tie, but it feels like a good tie for a rabbi to wear, especially when we're talking about literature. Wanda wants to know if you could speak at all. We have about 5 minutes left about my mother's Shabbat.
Um, I can't, just because I did read it, but it's been quite a while ago, and I don't remember it well enough. It's not familiar enough in my head that I would feel comfortable speaking about it, but I do remember that it was beautiful. So if you want to speak about it.
Well, what I will do is, since I'm a rabbi and I'm used to speaking about things that I don't really know, I'm happy to say it is his most poignant book. It really is a tribute to his mother's memory and to the kind of home she built. And so the characters, like all of Grada's characters, they're not simple, they're not flat or paper characters, but there is so much love that permeates those collections of stories. I highly recommend it. It's a lovely, lovely collection of novella.
Tempted to reread it now.
And Margot wants to know if you have anything to say about the Aguna.
So same for that. I basically, wait, let me think. The Aguna, I may have not read. I read Rabbis and Wives. I don't know, but regardless, so I'm not a rabbi. So I only feel comfortable speaking about what I really know about. So I'd rather not, at the moment.
Okay. Any other questions? Those of you who are joining us online, anything you want to say to us? All right, so let me Rose, any closing comment as we wrap down? Anything you want to be sure we mention?
So let me think. So just I would say that for me, it definitely felt like a privilege translating it. It ended up being a lot longer than I thought and a lot more work intensive than I thought. But it did feel, like I said, it was a privilege, and now that it's gotten all this attention and all these different publications are covering it and writing about it, I kind of feel almost like I did well by Grata, meaning okay, so, I don't know if you would have chosen me as his translator, but okay, I hope I didn't disappoint you. It feels a bit like that. I would also say, especially to people who know Yiddish, if you can get hold of the letters, they are fascinating to read. For Yiddish Book Center's Pakenträger, I translated a few of them, maybe 4 or 5 short letters, but there are a lot of really interesting ones. And then also, if you're interested in the dynamic between Chaim Grade and his wife, Inna, which a lot of people are, because it was a very interesting marriage, there's a whole lot about Inna in a lot of his letters. So you almost feel a little voyeuristic, but it's kind of fun to read. His frustrations with her, or sometimes, his love for her, that comes through too. There were even some Valentine's Day cards there that they sent to each other. So I would encourage people, if you are a fan of Grade and if you're interested, and if the book makes you more interested, this is worth checking out, especially now that Yivo digitized them. I had to go down physically, sift through them, figure out what was what, except for the ones that Yehuda Zirkin sent me. That was a pleasure because he scanned them for me and sent. But all the others, I just went through them, went through the boxes physically. But now that it's on there, check it out.
Great. Thank you. One last question. Someone wants to know, if they're new to Grata, what should they start with?
So maybe the one that you first asked about, the mother's, the Shabbos, what's the exact title?
My Shabbos days.
Yes. I think maybe that would be nice, just because it's shorter, it's more relatable. There's a sadness to it, but there's a beauty to it. I think, certainly to start with this, if you do, I'd be very happy, but this is a big book. It's a lot, and you have to get used to his style. With that, you have something that's, shorter, easier, more accessible, and it's beautiful. So I think that's a good idea.
One thing that's shorter and contained and quite famous, My Quarrel with Hirsch Rassemeyer,
Right.
which is an argument between 2 survivors of the Holocaust, one of whom has held on to their religious tradition, one of whom walks away from it. And what's incredible about it is neither feels like a caricature. He really presents what's compelling and challenging, and they each know that their choice has a price. And it's a wonderful way of entering into a really painful existential challenge for Jews after the Shoah.
Right. And especially if somebody enjoys kind of philosophy or the human part of that. And what's amazing is that none of them come out as quote unquote the winner.
Right.
Like, he makes such a good argument for both. It's almost like, so what do you believe?
Yeah.
So that's actually a very good choice also, right?
Like the Mishnah, it leaves room for the reader. Rose, we need to wrap this up. I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us for the gift you've given us with the translation of this book. It really is an artful and wonderful thing. I can only imagine that his neshama is pleased, and I hope you will find strength in that and go on to keep giving us all kinds of gifts from Yiddish literature, and thank you for what you've done.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege, and thank you so much for having me on here.